Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Defense is a big buzzword currently, with a lot in this sector opening up. Although what I say is a bit of a cliche, this sector was completely controlled till 2001, and 2002 onwards, the licensing of this sector began. And since 2002, we have actually seen in last 14 years a gradual opening. I won't say it is fully open, but it's almost getting fully open now. So this is a peculiar part of this sector, highly controlled, highly secrecy dominated, highly something which is only on need-to-know basis that gets shared, and that's a peculiar aspect, because anything that you do and your enemies know about it, it's a bit of an issue in knowing about your capabilities, your numbers, and what exactly you have in your inventory. So this is a sector which essentially we have seen in 2002, there was an opening. Subsequent to that, licensing began, and there's very sizable number of licenses today. And as the gradual opening of the sector happened, we have seen that there's more and more which is getting indigenously ordered. Last about 8.5 years, there's been a slowdown, but a positive trend in terms of opening continued. Probably what should have happened in 2 to 3 years is something which has taken 10 years. But obviously, we see as an industry a very clear opening of the sector gradually and steadily. And then we have a new government which essentially now talks of a completely liberalized scenario. So I'll take you through what is to look forward to overall, just a couple of slides on overall sector, and then thereafter I'll get specific to Larsen Toubro. If we really look at defense economy, there's a strong focus on indigenization, what we see today. Over last exactly 10 years, we actually kept on coming down on indigenous content, and gradually we became the largest importing nation. Last 2 years, financial years, we've been the largest importer in the world of defense goods. While the sector has grown and more than tripled, we have also seen that the imports genuinely grew, and the government always found ways to import it from A country or a B country, but it wouldn't get ordered within India. And 82% of government's physical purchases from overseas countries actually have been nominated purchases without any competitive bidding. Very sizable part obviously has been coming from the public sector undertakings and the ordnance factories. And just sheer statistics, if we go by, about 65%, that's let's say 2/3 of what the government buys in capital goods out of the defense sector, which today stands at about 85 to 90,000 crores, comes from the defense public sector undertakings and public sector undertakings and the OAB. The rest, about 35%, is where the foreigners and the other Indian companies vie for. And out of the 2/3 which gets ordered onto the OABs and the PSUs, trust me, a very sizable part gets imported, which nobody controls. And that's exactly the reason the country has that 70% import content scenario. It's an uncontrolled import which happens through a tierized industry, which is government owned, and thereafter there's a government purchases, which, as I said, out of that 30% which essentially gets bought overseas, 82% is nominated purchases. So there has been a sector which has had lots of ills behind, and today we suddenly now see a very, very positive momentum. The positive momentum essentially has also seen that if we analyze the sector over, let's say, last 10 to 15 years, we see a very clear 12% CAGR on the capex. So the capex cycles, if we look at on the defense, give away last 2 years with the economy not doing so well, one sees a drooping trend, but a long-term trend would show about 12% CAGR. And that's a very, very healthy growing market, inflation-free, and something which will keep rising at that certain rate. There are procurements today which have not happened for very, very long times. Thanks to delays in the public-owned companies, the shipyards have been having orders which virtually they cannot fulfill over next 25 years. Same is the scenario with the aircraft company, which is government-owned, probably cannot finish what they have in hand for 10 to 15 years, and similar is the scenario everywhere. And this is the backdrop of what we see in Make in India today. From a completely controlled sector to a sector which is now getting completely open. The GDP numbers one can keep debating, but the GDP number today genuinely has fallen below 2%. So the country cannot afford to spend far too much and then must innovate and find better ways of doing things to have the same amount of aspirations of the country being managed. Last 4 years, you see very, very clearly in dollar terms, it's almost a flat market, thanks to what has happened on the rupee-dollar scenario. What has changed in last 7-8 months that we see? There's a dramatic change in MOD. There's new blood, there's new team, there are new thoughts and completely fresh way of looking at things. When I say this, there have been 2 defense ministers in last 9 months, one a part-time and thereafter a full-time minister. And we have seen with both the policy moved forward. There have been very pragmatic approaches we have seen in adherence to procedure, but at the same time taking a bigger picture way of looking at things. And just one single example, the trucks which were not being bought for last 4 years because of a scam, and then somebody says, but why am I waiting for it? Don't my existing set of trucks, which are some 12,000 trucks of an inventory, now gets affected because I stopped buying? If there was an intermediary who was found to be wrong doing, let's deal with the intermediary later, but let me actually start having spares for my trucks or the aggregates for those trucks which can keep making the lines keep moving. It's exactly like saying you buy a car and then stop to go to a garage. And that's exactly what happened for the last 4 years and the sudden change one sees now. There are very, very proactive industry meets and kind of interactions taking place. And the best of that initiative, I was just telling Mr. Agarwal, there's an initiative under which the government secretaries actually meet industry every month. Unthinkable, typically 2 years back. Unthinkable, and it happens today. And there's a clear understanding at which what exactly are the industry issues and problems, and then obviously those problems are gradually getting addressed. We suddenly see an upswing on that discussion process last 9 months. There's a clear paradigm shift today visible. What we expect the Aero India to be making big announcements another 3 days down the line would be the first major initiative which will genuinely go away or attempt to go away from that pure L1. Pure L1 buying has been an ill behind so many of our systems not doing well. And that's exactly what is being addressed at the root of that acquisition process. Hopefully, that also gets into the simplified policy, which we expect to be now coming out with the new team being there at the government. Fast tracking of the decision-making process. We all have heard exactly 5 Defense Acquisition Council meetings actually clearing 1.4 lakh crore of new acquisition. And when we say new acquisition, we have to keep in mind that an acquisition program, once it begins, the actual business at the hands of an industry comes in typically 2 to 3 years down. There's a buying process because it's consolidated funds of India that get utilized, and towards those funds, there must be a proper traceability and complete transparency built in, and towards that, it does take that kind of time. But then thereafter, there's a sizable amount of business which is going to be visible. We see very clearly the defense budget today, or for that matter, it's a practice for a country, it's only the cash flow budget. So when you have typically 90,000 crores of a cash flow, imagine there's at any given time about 4.5 to 5 lakh crores of orders which have been physically placed. And a cash flow equivalent of a financial year is what gets budgeted. We normally see everybody among the analyst community as well as newspapers talk of that budget has gone up by 5,000 crores, there's more going to be bought. It's not really more going to be bought. More has already been committed into the order book. It's something which is physically going to be disbursed, and that's all that the defense budget actually means. So every defense budget, when it is talked about, we all can actually assume that during that year, out of that big chunk which has been ordered out, there's that portion which would physically get paid out, and that we see actually going up. This 1.4 lakh, which has just been cleared, will actually add to that order book kitty, as I said, typically 1.5 to 2 years down the line. The major issues faced by industry, which we've been able to voice through the chambers, and I sit on all the 3 chambers who talk to the government, and as a result we are able to communicate what exactly are the industry issues and what needs to be addressed. And trust me, there have been hundreds and hundreds of issues. Earlier years, obviously, many have been addressed, and there's some which are still to be done, and which we expect the new policy, typically 2 months, 3 months down the line, would be completely addressing what the industry wants. There's a very sizable focus on indigenization. We heard the Prime Minister talk about Make in India, and I'll actually take on a little more explanation of what exactly is in pipeline. Subsequent to this initiative, anything that the Defense Acquisition Council announced would be done has been under a category called Buy and Make India. It's a bit of a jargon. The government buys under 5 different categories. The first category now, the government must buy from an Indian company. And if there's something that they cannot buy because nobody has a product, then the next category is this Buy and Make India. What it means is I can buy something from that Indian company who brings in those goods from his foreign partner and thereafter makes them right here. So what it means is typically 50% is expected to be made within the country in value add. I'm not talking of buying from a tierized vendor who can import and give it to you. Actual rupee content of 50%, and that's the requirement of this Buy and Make India. Thereafter, there's a third category which is expected to be developed in India, which is called Make, and then there's a Buy and Make Global, and then there's a Buy Global. If nobody can do anything, then you will go out and buy from the world. And there's an exact reversal of the pyramid which the 2013 policy brought in at the behest of the industry, and that's something which is in operation today. So what we have seen over the last about 8 or 10 months, most programs actually are coming into either the Buy Indian or the Buy and Make Indian. So there's going to be genuinely 1.5 to 2 years down the line, very sizable upswing of what we see in the defense sector happening right within the country. Policy changes which already have been implemented last 6 months. We have seen liberalization of the licensing, genuine cutting down of the licensing category. It has happened. The defense export policy is getting streamlined. There's a policy getting created. Exports, India was never ever focused at. And the previous government actually talked of we cannot export death. While we can import death, and being the largest importers, we just did not ever think that there's something that can be exported. And that's exactly something getting addressed now. And there's a security manual, because there was a big bogey that only the government companies can maintain secrecy and security. And then there's some rules written down for everybody to follow. And obviously, this is something which is most of the private companies who actually are deeply entrenched into defense know how to manage it better than most of the government-owned companies. The Make in India, what we actually keep hearing is a 3-stage process. As we all see in the leadership on the industry, the first phase of it is that Make in India, which essentially means manufacture here, do a value addition within the country rather than importing full sort of systems and goods, bring them, does not matter where it comes from, make them here rather than importing. I mean, it's just that. And through that, it is expected that minimum 50% would start happening in India. The participation obviously would go far more in favor of the private companies, because anybody who is trying to come in, global players are not government-owned companies necessarily. Very sizable people who want to come and do it are private companies and who find a very right partner in India. So it's a private-private dialogue and the efficiency of dialogue that matters. Building of the internationally competitive manufacturing base, actually some scaling effects, some benefits out of scaling would start happening. And then there's a simplified procedure which now is getting in place. And we expect that simplification process to be almost near complete in about 2 to 3 months' time, and that's to be in practice. And towards that, there's an FDI liberalization. So we see a Make in India today, which essentially is giving certain amount of impetus to make that manufacturing here happen. And then we see the next phase begin, couple of years down, which obviously the Indian companies today are focused at, that's make for and make by. Customize products for India, even a car or a refrigerator, today we need to customize for India. So there's nothing unusual in saying the military goods are required to be completely customized for India. Trust me, no country in the world fights terrains which have a combination of the hills and the deserts. It's only in India you find suddenly a weapon system being lifted from a 50 degrees plus desert, and you take it to straight away Siachen and you expect it to be fighting. And we do make within Larsen Toubro some goods. You can take it into an aircraft from 36,000 feet, you can simply push out, it will land on ground and it will work. Now when you do that efficiency in logistics, then you also need systems which can deal with those sudden temperature changes, sudden environment changes. And those genuinely need to be customized into the entire system and a product design. We expect essentially under the second phase, that's exactly where the extra value add would come out of within India. And then there's Indian companies which will mature, move up the value chain, and there's further indigenous content increase. The import obviously would come down, and then the companies actually start becoming system integrators, from just products to complete system of systems like the ships, aircrafts. And the last phase is then genuinely taking off from Indian market as well as the global markets, and building on that genuine extra efficiency out of markets which will unite, make things cheaper, because the development costs and the production costs will get shared across much larger number. All of us know it's a scale which decides the price, and if there's a larger volumes, there will be better price. The changes which we see very clearly to be in pipeline from the government side suffices to say there's a clear 1-year plan and there's clear 3-year plan. The 1-year plan essentially talks of certain number of projects and programs, certain amount of positive policy impetus that would create more and more investment, more and more of those foreign people to come in and invest here. And then there's a long-term program. And on that, more and more of that make, which will be customized, Indian built, designed products for which government is willing to fund. Earlier days, it used to be always that you design, build something, do prototyping, take 8 years, and then it gets accepted, and then thereafter the sales used to begin. Now is a government who says, I want to fund you, 80% I'll fund you, 20% you put in as a stakeholder, do it accelerated basis, and we want to buy it. And those are the kind of programs. Today there are 2 major programs, about 60,000 crores which have been already decided, and there are some more in pipeline which will bring in genuinely those kind of numbers within next couple of months. There's obviously a lot of talk about the PPP. There are certain policy hurdles on that. The earlier policies obviously don't allow that to happen, and we expect that to be sorted out because of the policy impetus which is in place. Formulation of export certainly would make a big difference towards that, and that's a direction that over the next 3 years we should actually become a very, very export-friendly nation. The government has clearly issued directives to all the embassies, the embassy staff, the defense attaches, the military attaches, who now must come, must see industry here, go and become the ambassadors for selling what we actually see most of the foreign countries doing. Sitting in Delhi, the military attaché goes every day to Ministry of Defense looking for business. We expect same thing to happen for India outside. And that's exactly where the government is moving. I'll take off from that piece on the policy and what's happening in the sector to what we are doing in Larsen Toubro. I thought that's something which I should touch upon. The verticals in Larsen Toubro, there are 9 of them, which do something about the defense. The top 3 on the first line, obviously the largest of. There's heavy engineering and the shipbuilding, which is our own offshoot, where I belong. And there's an electrical business. We are the largest switchgear maker. And through that switchgear comes military electricals. For all the ships, submarines, and varieties of marine equipment and systems, there's a sizable amount of electrical that get bought. And that's exactly where it is. Through the construction arm, which is the next 3 in the second line, through a construction arm, there's a very specific work which happens. Highly classified, most of it, but we don't even probably ever make an announcement of lots of our orders out of this segment. So when I actually see the analyst community talking of a likely order inflow of so much, and that's exactly what I'm taking, making bundle job easier, we never ever would have made an announcement of defense orders. So you actually are in for some amount of surprise at the end of a quarter. So we are part of that surprise element. We are supposed to be maintaining secrecy in terms of what we tell you, and we are not allowed to actually announce as the orders start coming and what it is exactly for. And as a result, at the end of a quarter, you suddenly see some disconnect between what you expected versus what actually happens. The last 3 are the knowledge-based part, the first 2, the Infotech and the technology services, which do some amount of defense and aerospace work. And then the last is our latest initiative with the Nuclear Power Corporation of special steels. The country is expected to be building by 2032 63 gigawatts of nuclear power. Now, this is a dream towards which there was a very special steel plant which was to be built, and by choice, the government made a decision that it would be allowed to Larsen Toubro. It's a 74-26 joint venture, 74 in favor of Larsen Toubro, 26 Government of India, and it is invested operational at Hazira. It's a 1 kilometer long shop. From one end of a scrap steel, the other end you can have a 300-ton single piece hot forging. Cleanest of the metal anywhere possible in the world. There are just 2 places you can buy that kind of clean steel in the world. And that's a scale. Obviously would also do a lot for defense in addition to the nuclear and the space grade forgings. 5 or 6 specific verticals through which the business today runs. We have a portfolio which we talk of weapons and fire controls, and there are almost about 50 different class of systems which we have designed and built, and some of them gradually are getting into what is known as serial production. So as they start getting ordered, we keep getting volumes out of it. The naval, the land-based, some getting into air. And the complete intelligence behind is into the fire controls, and those fire controls are all indigenous, designed here, built here. So most of these class of systems, when we talk of Make in India, we talk of 80% and 90% indigenous content, and that's a differentiator for this company. It's sheer knowledge driven, and although the volumes today are small, it's very, very sizable indigenous content being built. The second most, I would say, prominent segment we see today, and we again built some of the products towards that, are in the artillery Government of India has not bought any artillery after the Bofors syndrome of 1980s. Late 80s onwards, no guns have been bought, and there's a 40,000 crore opportunity just in guns. And there's a lot which is happening in the market. There are many companies who are trying to do that. And 2 of our guns actually have completed trials, and there's some of the rocket launchers which we are today building in serial production mode. So there's 4 specific programs for L&T which are 2 in production, 2 about to any moment enter production. And that's a big opportunity. The entire bridging systems for Army, imagine from this end to the other end of this hall, you have a river or a water obstacle, and you want a bridge to be built in exactly 1 hour. And that bridge is mobile. Your complete convoy reaches there, a bridge is laid, you cross in, go to the other end, pick up a bridge and go out. There are 5 types of these systems which India uses, all 5 we do. And 2 out of these are today in serial production. The others are getting in over a couple of years down, would be produced. It's not big numbers again. Don't mistake me when I keep talking of this thing, that there are 2 crore, 3 crore, 5 crore items. But these 2, 3, 4 crore items will stop a military marching. And these are those complete 99%, 98% indigenous value adds. There's nothing imported in those. The naval construction, a huge segment which L&T concentrates on, the ships, submarines. An opportunity piece over the next decade, if I don't say just 4-5 years, over next decade would be probably in excess of 3.5 lakh crore. It's a big item, big opportunity, and that's exactly where you see a huge amount of everyday newspapers you open and you see big news on this segment. Big programs, we actually are seeing as of now very, very large 3 programs which will get into decision making. Next 1 year to 1.5 years, we should see at least about between 50 to 100,000 crore programs getting decided in favor of private sector. So number of players we know who all are there in this, and obviously there's a very sizable opportunity towards that. The differentiator for Larsen Toubro is that the naval systems, when we build them, we build not only just a ship or a submarine, we build at least a couple of dozen equipment that fits inside. And that's an extra value add we create. Even if, let's say, a government shipyard was to build a ship, this equipment would be from Larsen Toubro. And that's essentially where we differentiate, whether it's done by us or anybody else. There's no other equipment maker, a major equipment maker in the country, and that's a sizable value add across the naval segment for us. That's where you see on the right side of the picture a very sizable amount of naval equipment. Then you see a very peculiar at the center, that's a ship lift at the Kattupalli shipyard. Imagine if you want to launch a ship a day or every alternate day. This is a shipyard which has been in-house designed and built, which actually can launch or retrieve a ship every alternate day. So that's a scale you can do through sheer innovation. You may have any amount of dry docks, you can't do that. And that's exactly how the yard was designed and built, and the yard is today operational. And as a result, we see a very sizable traction with these naval orders getting settled into the shipbuilding. The next major segment for us is into the sensors, avionics. Lots of radar systems have been all along been imported. Some obviously used to be built by Bharat Electronics. We entered into this sector about a decade back, and we now have few products of our own. And we expect some of these to be doing well in times to come. What you see at the bottom is a very, very small radar. It's the world's only radar which can measure a 1 meter accuracy at a couple of thousand kilometers. It's a technology which is banned, can never be sold by any country to any country. It had to be designed and built, and it's for our own satellites. We can control satellites sitting on ground because of these systems, and no nation would sell these technologies. So where we again come in is some of these never possible kind of situations have been made converted. And I must say, if we didn't have the 98 onwards sanctions, some of these technologies would not have matured. There's about a dozen out of our portfolio which genuinely fit into that kind of a national service. We may not have made money on these sectors, but we actually created a unique positioning for the country out of what we do. Missiles and anything that flies on helicopters and aircrafts, today there's only one company in the country, more than 3 lakh crore of a commitment of future business into that, and there's nothing being produced in terms of sheer output. Far better could have been done by having more number of people in the sector, but it has not happened in the past. We today see very, very sizable amount of traction on that serious tier 1 creation in the aerospace sector. And towards missiles, we actually produce some of them serially, not the full missile, but the complete airframes. And from this assembly of an airframe, within a 3-day, it gets converted into a full-fledged missile after it goes to a government factory. Even today, no private company can build a complete weapon, including explosives. And that's exactly what I say. We are almost there at that 100, but we are short of that 100. There's still some policy issues, and those policy issues, as we see, will keep getting addressed. What you see on the previous slide is one product at the bottom, and I just want to show it with a thing. Every satellite which has flown in the country on the ISRO rockets, there are at least a dozen systems in the ISRO rockets which go from us. And it's a very small business for Larsen & Toubro, but we stay committed to continue doing it. Every booster is, solid rocket booster is done by L&T. Every satellite solar array devices are made by us. That's something which has never failed in last 20 years. The number of satellites that have been flown, the reliability into a product never makes it fail. Otherwise, imagine you put in $300 million into a satellite, it goes up, and the solar array doesn't open. It's all a waste. So some of these are the big programs which we see next 2 to 3 years, 4 years, and that's exactly where the big numbers of an opportunity. I'm not saying only for Larsen & Toubro, but somebody similar to Larsen & Toubro in the industry can really look forward to. About 20,000 crore opportunity, out of which a 7,000 crore opportunity for a gun is in trials. And it's 1.5 to 2 years in trials now. We expect trials to be getting over yet another year and a half down. And the reason I talked of those terrains, the weapon that you make must now be actually tested and proven for a couple of months into each of those terrains. There's a program below that, about 4,500-5,000 crores, and that's the next one. Again, a product has completely gone through all possible trials, all trials completed. We now expect this order over next 1 year. And then the mounted gun, which has recently been cleared, another 15,000 crore program. And then our indigenous pinakas, which continue getting bought. Once in a while, the government keeps placing order. If we look at the next 7-8 years, it's about 13 to 14,000 crore opportunity. And then there are some gun missile systems. And the largest of the make program, 2 have been decided, as I said. The next one is a 40,000 crore program about to be announced. We expect less than 6 weeks from today. And the shipbuilding, as I said, it's a very, very large opportunity. What we see within next 3 years, likely to get into a decision-making table, and some of the orders actually getting placed, is roughly adds to 1.5 lakh crore. And that's a sizable piece. And we obviously quite well positioned as a company to get into some of these. The years with government purchases, one drought, and you know, this 40-50,000 crore won't be available to the government. And then there would be one extra financial year. So when we talk of typically these strategic sectors, The government must find out of that budget that they collect out of revenues, about every 1 in 7 gets spent on defense. Now, if that's the kind of defense spend out of the government budget, the moment you have any natural calamity, the first sector that gets hit genuinely is the same defense. And as a result, we see a year, 2 year, give a leeway, decision making can always slip. Positive part is lots of these are now becoming all indigenous, and that's a very, very major opportunity spectrum which we'll see moving forward. Some auxiliary ships, obviously, one will keep doing those. Having put up a big shipyard, we can't only look at the big programs, we also need to look at the small programs. The missile is another very, very large opportunity. As yet, all government nominated. Going forward, we see this to be completely open. I won't even bet my money, next 3 years nothing would happen. But 3 to 5 years horizon, the opportunity that will open on missiles alone would be about 85 to 100,000 crores. Today there are two very, very clear major programs happening in the country. One is the Akash missiles and second is the BrahMos missile. Again, very well known program, very majorly talked about in media. Both these programs we actually do very sizable amount of work, and that's a revenue stream for us today. Military communication has been off late in news. A couple of days back, we expect some major government announcements to be happening, and as a result, this is a segment which is genuinely looking up. This is a sector which again can never be imported, and that's exactly the reason this 60,000 crore program will happen in India. If it could be imported, probably it would have been imported 5 years back. And the reason it cannot be imported is your secrecy codes can never be shared with anybody. You cannot have any non-Indian or even any foreign passport holder to be working on these programs. So that's exactly where these are completely indigenous. Some of the radars I talked about, some opportunities there, about 4,000-5,000 crore, and futuristically about another 15,000-20,000 crores opportunities we see. That's exactly where I would like to stop and take on questions rather than me going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patil. The floor is open for questions. Anybody?
Mr. Patil, many of these are obviously very high technology products. As you go forward in the various areas that you've listed out, do you see L&T having the technology within itself today, or do you see yourselves having to source the technology from outside?
I would like to say we differentiated ourselves with respect to anybody. The business end of defense is visible last 10 to 12 years. The R&D end of defense began 28 years back. We've been actually working on lots of these technologies, and the sectors we focus on primarily, let me say primarily, are on our own steam. We obviously would not want to do everything. We certainly, from a position of knowledge, would be able to integrate a partner's product. And that's exactly what today we do on the mega program, not necessarily that I would make everything, but from a position of, as a system integrator, I can take somebody else's product, and some products we actually have collaborated. Like the two guns, one we collaborated with the Koreans, second we collaborated with the French. We found this joint development program, which nobody talks in the industry till date, but the joint development program is a model you can genuinely create a great new product in 18 to 20 months. And that's something which we realized, we leveraged, and that's exactly we are moving forward. So to answer you, typically 80% I would say would be in-house, homegrown. Some obviously will want a partner to bring in, and there's always some technology bought outs. It's not the value-wise 100% or 80% indigenous.
You also mentioned shipbuilding to be a major opportunity, especially a short-term opportunity, 1.5 lakh crores over the next 3-4 years. Is that an area that you see yourselves having the required technology?
On the shipbuilding, we would certainly have something which will come from overseas. The ships, the surface ships, we are today able to do completely on our own, the smaller class of ships. The bigger ships, typically the frigate destroyers, are still not placed onto private sector. So I would talk about it when it starts happening. The smaller ships we can completely do on our own. We don't need somebody, even for the fundamental design we don't need. From the hull form onwards we do that. On the submarines, we do the entire value chain except the basic design. So the basic design we certainly need a partner for, and that's exactly what would happen on the submarine side. So sizable opportunity out of that 1.5 lakh crore is into submarines, which is where we certainly will have a partner. So today, the big program which is unfolding in the country, there's a foreign technology player, and then there's an Indian player. The Indian player would be bidding with the foreigner's design having been taken as an input and based on which he would evolve the submarine. And that's exactly the program for. So some of those programs we certainly will have a partner.
Sir, in a submarine project, like ideally, what is the percentage or how much components we can do it in-house, and how much, say, typically we will have to source technology or import? If you can give some, or maybe some parts where we are already, I believe we have done some work in past also. So if you can highlight on submarine project, how much is something which L&T can value add?
On the indigenous content, as I said, there are products we have done 98% indigenous. There are products which we have done 50% indigenous content. On some of the early ships, we actually had to import a lot, and those are products we did with 55% indigenous content. But I would say that this is not a marketplace where one could talk without a product specific value add. So it's class. If you look at an engineering system, it probably would be in excess of 90% indigenous content. If you talk of a weapon system, it probably will be 70-30. If you talk of a ship, it probably would be 60-40. Feasible, I am talking, what can be done in the country. And once you have overall portfolio, we actually expect what the government talks of 70-30, if it genuinely gets ordered in the country, can happen. Couple of years, we can actually make it happen.
And sir, in landing platform lock, how much is available for private players, and in submarines also out of
the
6?
The current decision of the government is the first 2 ships would be with whosoever wins the competition. In specific to LPD, there are 2 ships which will be done by the lead private yard. The subsequent 2 are nominated to a government PSU. We are yet to hear about a final decision. As the ordering happens, we will exactly know how much is open. The tender actually, or RFP as they say in defense, is for 2+2. But the decision is subject to change on the last day. It's a scale, it's a volume, it's varieties of issues. So I don't really know. If you ask me today how much is going to be indigenous or how much is going to be in private sector, as per tender guarantee it is 2. Whether it's more, yes, we'll know with time.
And how long is, at what stage is the ordering for, say, landing platform?
LPD technical evaluations are over. It's a commercial process which is beginning. We expect a decision probably in about 6 to 9 months' time.
And for artillery guns?
Sorry?
For artillery guns, what is the stage of ordering?
Artillery, we expect a decision, that's the first program, about 12 to 15 months from now. We expect, actually, we hope next March would be a time. It probably could slip depending on how next financial year in terms of finances is. It's pure finance tying up.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Sir, wanted to understand the offset opportunity that is now coming up, because what we understand is that there is like around $10 billion or $15 billion of offsets which can play out over the next 10 years or so. And the second thing which I was keen to understand is that on the submarine part, in India we have Mazgaon dock which is constructing submarines, And do you think we as a country has the economies of scale to have 2 or 3 more shipyards constructing submarine, or would the entire order for the 6 submarine would go to 1 or 2 shipyards?
I'll take the second part first. The first part is far too easier for me. The submarine, you say very rightly said, worldwide, the countries which can afford only one submarine builder. There are some countries which afford 2. So India, to my mind, because of what we are going to be building, because there is a clear visibility of naval strategic plan, and Navy has been that way very open service. If we really look at what the Navy wants, one MDL is not good enough. There is definitely a room for a second submarine builder. The next thing you said is about whether one would get 6. There's a clear government decision that whosoever wins it can build all 6. Now, if the one who wins it actually comes up and says, I cannot do it, then it's a different scenario. But obviously, if it's a private sector who wins it, he's not going to be the one who will go and say, I can't do it. He would find ways to do it in the same 8 to 10 years' time. If it's a PSU, we can never be sure about that cycle, because the submarines which today are under construction on a 2005 contract are not going to be delivered at least for next 7 years. So that's exactly where it's an efficiency-driven decision. And there is a clear committee subsequent to the decision by the government that we are now looking for a next second yard. This second yard, if they can do it, all 6 will be ordered on them. So that's on the submarine front. There would be essentially 2 submarine builders. In terms of shipbuilding, the numbers are far too large. Probably there is room for more than 2. Every sector, whenever it has opened, there's been always, we saw that in aviation, we saw that in banking, we saw it everywhere. There are too many people. Consolidation will happen someday and will actually take some reasonable positions, and based on that there will be few people who will sustain and do well. In terms of the offsets part you asked me, today offset is certainly a reality, and it actually came in 2006, but I wouldn't really put in my money for 5 years hence into anything called offset. The reason being, the moment there's an indigenization focus, and if 90–80% of the orders are going to be placed on Indian companies, where is going to be an offset? Offset comes out of, if I order onto a foreign country, 30% of what I place onto a foreign OEM, he must make and buy from India in the form of offsets. So offsets numbers, whatever you read, are looking at the rear view and driving forward. So it's a rear view driving in terms of the big numbers you talked of. Obviously, I can give you a perspective on exact what are numbers. Just look at, as I said right at the beginning, 2/3 of the orders are even today placed in the country. 1/3 comes from outside, within which there is a 4–5% private shipyard. So let's say 30%, which is roughly, just for calculation ease, take 30,000 crores getting ordered onto a foreigner. So there's a 10,000 crore opportunity out of offsets, assuming 100% contracts would be above 300 crore. Trust me, not even 70–80% would be in that. So it's a 6,000 to 7,000 crore per year opportunity in offset. It's not big. It's actually made to be far larger for varieties of reasons of talking. When people talk of offset, they talk of entire defense capex and put it into offset. And that's exactly where the numbers go wrong. The numbers are not that large. Next part about offsets is, the more and more starts getting ordered in the country, as this 30–40 becomes 60–70 in the country, you won't have much of offsets left. It would typically be an opportunity size of 5–6,000 crore, may grow to 10,000 crore kind of a scenario. But if you have higher and higher content automatically happening here, none of your foreign partners actually will have offsets to do. They would have already fulfilled that through that extra indigenous content.
And sir, one more thing, based on the experience with INS Arihan, does that put us in any competitive, superior competitive positioning for the submarine project?
You're asking public domain information on the program is, I cannot tell you anything about the program. Okay, that's for open forum. Obviously, there are programs in the country which you can trust me on that. Let me give an example of absolute public information. On the Mars mission, we've been how much cheaper than anybody else in the world is known. Let me not say anything more on what you asked. India, indigenous knowledge, indigenous people, indigenous technology can do wonders. That's all I can say.
Any more questions?
So with respect to the change in FDI that has been done now, do we see foreign suppliers of technology willing to commit at 49%, or you think more needs to be done there?
I do not see any reason why somebody will not come, and the reason behind that is very, very clear. Today, the most advanced nations do not allow higher than certain content. And I understand what I am speaking. Germany has a limit of 25%, so you can't even block any decision if you were to make a JV in Germany. So 25 plus you cannot buy into a German company. So that's Germany. Technology we talk of, one of those evolved countries. United States, another technologically very, very advanced country, beyond 20% ownership by American company into any company anywhere in the world must follow all American laws. Now imagine, why do we need 49? You allow 21% or even 20% to an American company, you will follow American laws, you will not export anything to any country without US having cleared it. So these are genuine denial regimes. So when in defense we talk of the moment you tip off that balance of 49, you actually have allowed anybody to walk into your home. To my mind, 49 is what the government can do the best. Now, there are obviously going to be exceptions, and I can state few examples of those exceptions. India probably would take far too long to build an aero engine. Now, if somebody says, I want to come here and set up an aero engine line, why 49? He can own it 100%. Government doesn't say no, and that's exactly the pragmatism in Make in India. Come make it here, my people will at least do it, I will have some value add, which may be anything to the order of 40–50%. And that's exactly the pragmatism we see in the current government as compared to what was happening in the past. Past government was stuck with 26. We also said 26 is not good enough because it only allows you a veto, but doesn't allow you an equitable ownership of the value. And 49 today takes it very, very close to what one would look for. Anything higher than that, to my mind, on anything that is strategic to the country would just not happen. Aero engines or similar stuff, you will keep buying whether it's a military aircraft or a civil aircraft or anything. So in civil aviation areas, certainly there's no limit. It can be 100%. Lots of dual technology items actually can be within the same domain. I don't think there anybody who is coming in here and saying that I want to set up that as yet. People are watching if that goes, who bats an eyelid first. Does the government further go beyond 49, or he comes in at that 49 and then says, I have a special product. And incidentally, the current policy allows for those special products. It's not restricted at 49. Bulk will not be beyond 49. Special stuff, you come out with a clear proposal, you can own it 100%. There's no restriction.
Any more questions? Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.